Bobbing in the Pacific under almost ideal conditions, Integrity spanned 694,000 miles during its journey from launch to splashdown.
Well, these are the latest visual we're getting. This is after the Artemis II crew. The crew returns home after a 10-day spectacular voyage around the moon and back. The Orion Integrity capsule carrying the 4 astronauts splashed into the Pacific Ocean off the southern California coast, as they have been now taken for recovery. These are the visuals we're getting after the Artemis crew. They returned home after the 10-day voyage around the moon and back, and the Orion Integrity capsule, which carried the 4 astronauts, successfully splashed into the Pacific Ocean off the southern coast.
Once again, all 4 crew members now on the front porch, and the procedure to begin hoisting them up to these 2 Navy helicopters hovering overhead will begin shortly.
After a historic journey around the moon, the 4 astronauts on board NASA's Artemis II mission have returned to Earth, and they have been gotten out of the capsule, after which they would be taken to the helicopters, which are just waiting around the corner. Now, the Orion spacecraft carrying astronauts Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover and Christina Koch of the United States, along with Jeremy Hansen. After successfully completing the mission, they've made a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Southern California. Well, the 4 astronauts were the first to venture near the moon in more than 5 decades, and even though they did not make a moon landing, the trajectory of their spacecraft, it took them further in space than any of the Apollo missions that have made the moon landing in the 1960s and 1970s. Well, in all, during their 10-day journey, the astronauts of Artemis II mission traveled a distance of 694,481 miles. Now, that's about 1.12 million kilometers, which incidentally is not the maximum by a manned mission. But after the historic journey around the moon, all 4 astronauts safely and successfully, they've returned to Earth this morning. The Orion spacecraft, which was carrying astronauts Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen, they have made a successful splashdown in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Southern California.
NASA's Associate Administrator, Amit Kshatriya, to be joining us shortly for a short interview while the recovery operations continue out in the Pacific. So we'll stand by for that. And then we'll turn it back over to Megan Cruz aboard the USS John P. Murtha.
Well, as we can see from the visuals, the crew members are now out of the Orion capsule. NASA has confirmed it, and a helicopter which is hovering overhead will be picking them up shortly. This is going to be done individually and with the help of the recovery ship. As we saw, there was a raucous celebration going on in the mission control as well. Flight Director Rick Henflig, he invited the hundreds of flight controllers who were involved in the Artemis II mission into the room to celebrate the successful return of the 4 astronauts. In fact, President Donald Trump offered his congratulations to NASA and the very talented crew of the Artemis II mission. The entire trip was spectacular. The landing was near perfect. And as President of the United States, he said that he couldn't have been more proud. Well, this is after a historic and spectacular journey around the moon. The 4 astronauts on board NASA's Artemis II mission have successfully and safely returned back to Earth this morning. They have become the people to have gone the farthest ever from the Earth's surface. The Orion spacecraft, which carried astronauts Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Cook and Jeremy Hansen, they made a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Southern California shortly after 5 a.m. India time on Saturday. Well, the 4 astronauts were the first to venture near the moon in more than 5 decades, and even though they did not make a moon landing, the trajectory of their spacecraft took them further in space than any of the Apollo missions that made the moon landing in either the 1960s or the 1970s.
Of the successful end of this mission that carried 4 astronauts around the moon on a lunar flyby, and the first test flight of Orion with crew members on board. Splashdown occurring an hour and 32 minutes ago after a flawless descent back into the Earth's atmosphere for the vehicle. Its 4 crew members in good shape, simply enjoying their time right now on the front porch, as it were, the inflatable raft alongside of their Integrity spacecraft. We're expecting Amit Kshatriya, the NASA Associate Administrator, to join us here momentarily for a brief interview before we turn it back over to Megan Cruz aboard the USS John P. Murtha, the recovery ship.
The 4 crew members of NASA's Artemis II moon mission, they returned to Earth, and this was around 8:07 p.m. Eastern Time. NASA plans to extracted the astronauts from the Orion spacecraft one by one, and it is then going to fly them via helicopter to U.S. Navy ship. Now, it's important to note that re-entry is always one of the riskiest part of a space flight, but that was particularly true for Artemis II because of Orion's heat shield. It's a critical layer that protects astronauts from extreme temperatures, which had some design flaws. To reduce the risk for the astronauts, NASA had modified the path for the capsule's re-entry. Orion descended faster and at a steeper angle to minimize the time that it was exposed to the highest heat. During the 10-day Artemis II mission, the crew became the first humans to travel around the moon in more than 50 years. And they set a new record for the farthest distance ever traveled from Earth. The astronauts were also the first to launch on NASA's Giant Space Launch System rocket and to travel aboard the Orion spacecraft. And after this spectacular journey around the moon, all 4 astronauts have safely returned back to Earth. The Orion spacecraft, which was carrying astronauts Wiseman, Victor Glover and Christina Cook, along with Jeremy Hansen, they made a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Now, the 4 astronauts, they are the first to venture near the moon in more than 5 decades, as we were just discussing. And even though they did not make a moon landing, the trajectory of their spacecraft took them further in space than any of the Apollo missions that made the moon landing in the 1960s or 70s.
The NASA Associate Administrator. Amit, a little bit of history made tonight, a little bit of history made over the past few weeks. Your thoughts as this team here basks in the glow of what they just accomplished?
Yeah, Rob, we're here in the control center, and it's kind of overrun with jubilant folks in the mission control, Houston, as well as engineering, and folks that just want to be here, part of it, as we watch our crew get extracted from the vehicle. And, you know, my thought is always about these teams, the team that's in the water right now, pulling the crew out, the team here in Houston that worked so hard over the last 10 days, no sleep to get this done. You know, we still have some work to do to get the crew to the med bay here on the ship. They all look great coming out, so hopefully that won't be too long. You know, I think we saw the administrator on the boat too, giving his thanks to the Navy team on the Murtha, which they're just an incredible group of sailors. I was able to visit with them a couple weeks ago. And then if you pull it all the way back to the workers and the folks that joined the rocket at Michoud, that made the heat shield tiles that held together tonight, that that stacked the vehicle in Florida, that integrated the vehicle in Denver, that fired the engines in Stennis, that fired the boosters in Promontory. I mean, this is the entire team, coming together and being tested by the environment that this machine went through, and they did it right. The work was good. They did it right.
You've said in a number of briefings, of course, and in other forums that this is just the first step. The cadence has to step up, as the administrator has indicated. Now, it's a little early for the full report card on how Integrity did, but did this mission ultimately, from your eyes view, exceed expectations?
It absolutely did. I mean, I was waiting to talk about this until we were in the water, and I think we still have, again, work to do to bring it in and really kind of go through it bolt by bolt and see what we learned. But I mean, so far, given what we learned during the mission and given how we performed on ascent, on entry, I always think about energy in terms of the states that you worry about the most, and every time we put these machines through these incredibly energetic states that came through. So I'm fairly confident that we made a big step tonight to get us on the path towards the surface. I think the path to the surface is open now. We do have to do all the work, and we'll make sure we talk about that as cleanly as we can. We learned a few things during the mission, but I have to tell you, this was an incredible test of an incredible machine.
From an American psyche standpoint, the Empire State Building was lit up red, white, and blue tonight. Our coverage was seen on baseball stadiums around the major leagues. How captivating was this experience for the American people, for the world, in fact, as we returned to the moon?
I have not been able to watch a lot of the coverage as we've progressed through the mission. I will tell you, just from my witness in Florida before launch, and then seeing the people's faces here, and then reading where I can about how things are going. I think this has been a gift to the world from NASA. NASA has given the world a gift, proving to folks all over the place, especially young people, and that to me is what this is really about. Young people, when they see what we can do when we work together, when we have teams that collaborate, that it doesn't matter how hard the problems are, we can solve them. I'm hopeful that Artemis II, as folks witness what we were able to do with this incredible crew, this incredible team that we've birthed into the world, scientists and engineers and artists that have been inspired by this. And even if they don't come work in the program, which separately they should come work in the program, because Lord knows we need the help, but even if they don't want to come work in the program, hopefully they grow up to recognize they can do amazing things when they work together and contribute to society and be good citizens and really change the way, the challenges that are coming in the world are overcomable if we work together like this.
And one final.
Well, the Artemis II crew successfully re-entered the atmosphere after a routine but nerve-wracking 6-minute communications blackout. But after all the hiccups, as we can see on our screens, it was a spectacular end to a spectacular journey. In fact, the NASA boss, Jared Isaacman, has declared we're back in the business of sending astronauts to the moon, and this is just the beginning.